Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about how misinformation can alter history. And we're going to be taking a look at one particular event to see that happening, and that is the Boston Massacre. Bum, bum. So let's take a look at what actually went down. You see, at this point, by the year 1770, some of the most troublesome of all of the patriots were living up in Boston, Massachusetts. So remember, the patriots were the ones who really wanted to overthrow their government, their British government, and start a brand new government. They didn't know what it would be yet. They just knew they weren't loyal to King George and his ways anymore, and they wanted to start something new, right? The patriots are really the ones that are pushing for a revolution. So in order to respond to that, King George sends 4 additional regiments of troops to Boston in order to bring order, because things were just so unruly in Boston with all these nasty patriots. They were given a specific order, however. Those troops, those British soldiers, were told, do not fire on the Bostonians. Do not shoot the citizens. This was a very strict order that they were given. However, on March 5th, 1770, a crowd started brewing outside the Boston Customs House, and that building is still standing today. There it is amongst Boston's high-rise buildings, and there it is, that historic building where the Boston Massacre took place is still standing. Pretty cool. So these unruly patriots were outside the Boston Customs House, and they were like yelling at the soldiers that were standing guard there. And it was a cold March day, and so there were chunks of ice on the ground too. So they're hurling rocks and chucking ice and insulting the soldiers' mothers, like the worst things you could possibly be doing. And so the scene got really, really tense, right? So in all of this craziness, someone fired a shot. And to this day, we do not know exactly where that one first gunshot came from. Some people say it came from the crowd. Others say it was the British soldiers. We do not know today. But after that one first shot, then the British soldiers started firing into the crowd. Mostly out of self-defense, probably, because remember, it was an unruly crowd. They were throwing sticks and stones and rocks at them. I guess rocks and stones are the same thing, but you know what I mean. So at the end of all this, 5 people were killed, 10 were injured. Side note, one of the first who was killed was a man named Crispus Attucks, and he was an African-American man. He was actually in slavery before, but had gotten freedom from slavery about 20 years before this event. And he's considered the first casualty or the first martyr of the revolution because he died for this cause. So kind of interesting that it was a former slave African-American was one of the first people killed in the revolution, right? Now, 5 people dead is 5 too many. Let's establish that first. However, by our language standards, the word massacre means lots and lots and lots of people killed. And most people would agree that 5 people isn't necessarily enough to call it a massacre. However, when you're talking about an event and you're trying to get people angry and get people to join your revolutionary cause, to say, oh, did you hear about that unfortunate incident in Boston? That's not going to get them riled up as much as if you were to say, did you hear about the massacre there? And so people started sharing information about the Boston Massacre in order to rile people up and have them join the revolution, right? So Paul Revere's engraving, that's this picture over here, it depicted the Boston Massacre to happen a certain way. And as you look at this picture, it makes it look like the British soldiers were organized and they were firing upon a crowd of innocent civilians. And that's just not how it actually went down. But people see this poster and they go, oh, that's what happened there? And it gets them to join the revolution, right? So protests spark all throughout the colonies. Violence is erupting everywhere in response to the Boston Massacre. The Patriots want all the British troops gone for good, but the Loyalists they're actually a little bit scared now. And they're saying, don't believe what the Patriots are saying. They are misinforming you. Please send more British troops to protect us. And while all this is happening, a man named John Adams, who will later become our first vice president and our second president of the United States, he defended the British soldiers at their trial because he believed that no matter who you are and what you've done, you deserve a fair trial. Even though in his mind, in his heart, the British soldiers were kind of his enemy, right? He was a patriot himself, but he believed firmly that people deserve a fair trial. And so that's one of the rights that we continue to enjoy today as well. So once again, we can see how some of that misinformation about the Boston Massacre ended up changing the course of the revolution. And so in this week's lesson, you're going to be taking a look at that engraving specifically and how other misinformation might make changes in the way you see things. All right, take a look, everyone.